The old Victorian house stood at the edge of the small town of Ravenswood, shrouded in mystery and tales of haunting whispers. Its imposing silhouette against the night sky seemed to beckon the curious and repel the fearful. For years, it had remained uninhabited, its windows dark and its walls silent. That was until the Daniels family moved in. The Daniels were an ordinary family of 4. Thomas and Sarah Daniels, along with their 2 children, Emily and Michael, were looking for a fresh start. Thomas had recently lost his job in the city, and the affordable price of the house was too good to pass up. A new beginning, they thought, unaware of the malevolent forces that lay within. On the day of their move, the sky was an overcast gray, and a light drizzle began to fall. As they drove up the gravel path to their new home, the house loomed before them, its once grand facade now weathered and foreboding. Emily, the youngest at 8 years old, clung to her teddy bear, while Michael, a teenager, rolled his eyes at the ominous sight. "This place looks like something out of a horror movie," Michael muttered as they unloaded the moving truck. "Nonsense," Thomas replied, trying to keep his tone upbeat. "It just needs a bit of TLC. Besides, think of all the space we'll have." Sarah, ever the optimist, smiled and nodded. "We'll make it our own," she said, squeezing Thomas's hand. "Just wait and see." As the days turned into weeks, the Daniels worked tirelessly to transform the old house into a home. They painted walls, fixed broken windows, and cleared out the cobwebs that seemed to regenerate overnight. Despite their efforts, an unsettling feeling lingered in the air. It started with small things. Doors would creak open on their own, and lights would flicker without warning. At first, they blamed the quirks on the age of the house. "Old houses have their ways," Sarah would say, brushing off Emily's fears. But then, the disturbances grew more pronounced. One evening, as Sarah was preparing dinner, she heard a faint whispering behind her. She turned, expecting to see one of the children, but found only an empty kitchen. Shaking off the chill that ran down her spine, she continued cooking, convincing herself it was her imagination. Michael, too, began to notice strange occurrences. His room, located in the attic, had an eerie atmosphere. He often felt as though he was being watched, and at night, he heard the sound of footsteps outside his door. Whenever he gathered the courage to check, he found nothing. Emily, who had always been sensitive to the supernatural, started talking to someone she called the Sad Lady. At first, Thomas and Sarah dismissed it as an imaginary friend, but Emily's descriptions were disturbingly vivid. She spoke of a woman with hollow eyes and a sorrowful expression who would sit at the foot of her bed and cry. "Emily, sweetheart, it's just a bad dream," Sarah reassured her one night as she tucked her in. "But she's real, Mommy," Emily insisted, her eyes wide with fear. "She's sad because of the bad man." Curiosity piqued and unease growing, Thomas decided to investigate the history of the house. He spent hours at the local library, poring over old records and newspapers. What he discovered sent chills down his spine. The house had a dark past. Built in the late 1800s, it had been home to the Blackwood family, known for their wealth and influence. But beneath their facade of respectability lay a story of tragedy and horror. In 1899, Eleanor Blackwood, the matriarch, was found dead under mysterious circumstances. Her husband, Gregory Blackwood, was rumored to have been a cruel and abusive man. Shortly after Eleanor's death, Gregory disappeared without a trace, and the house fell into disrepair. Whispers of ghostly sightings and unexplained phenomena plagued the property for decades. Subsequent owners reported strange occurrences, and many left abruptly, unable to endure the haunting presence within its walls. Armed with this knowledge, Thomas shared his findings with Sarah. "We need to be careful," he warned. There's something wrong with this house. Sarah, though shaken, remained resolute. We can't just leave, Thomas. We've put everything into this place. We have to find a way to make it work. As the days grew shorter and the nights longer, the haunting presence in the house became more aggressive. Objects would move on their own, and disembodied voices filled the rooms. The family's once joyful home was now a prison of fear. One stormy night, the full extent of the house's malevolence revealed itself. Thunder rumbled in the distance as the wind howled through the trees, rattling the old windows. The family huddled together in the living room, seeking comfort in each other's presence. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the house into darkness. The temperature dropped, and an oppressive silence filled the air. Then, a low, guttural growl echoed through the halls, sending a wave of terror through the Daniels. "We need to get out of here," Thomas said urgently, grabbing a flashlight. As they made their way to the front door, it slammed shut with a force that shook the house. Panicked, Thomas tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. The growling grew louder, and the family could feel an unseen force pressing in on them. Emily screamed as a shadowy figure appeared at the top of the stairs. It was the sad lady, her eyes filled with anguish. Behind her, a darker, more sinister presence loomed. The bad man. Sarah clutched Emily to her chest, while Michael stood frozen in fear. Thomas, desperate to protect his family, shouted at the spirits. "Leave us alone. What do you want?" The bad man's eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and a cold, cruel smile spread across his face. "You are mine," he hissed, his voice echoing through the house. "Just like the others." The family felt an intense pressure, as if invisible hands were squeezing the life out of them. Emily's cries grew fainter, and Sarah's strength waned. Thomas struggled to keep his grip on the flashlight as darkness closed in around them. Then, in a moment of sheer willpower, Michael broke free from his paralysis and rushed to the wall where he had seen an old crucifix hanging. He grabbed it and held it out toward the bad man. "Leave us alone," he shouted, his voice trembling but determined. The bad man recoiled, his form flickering like a candle flame in the wind. The sad lady's expression softened, and she reached out as if to touch the crucifix. There was a blinding flash of light, and the house shook violently. When the light faded, the oppressive presence was gone. The family lay on the floor, gasping for breath. The front door creaked open, and a cool breeze swept through the house, carrying with it a sense of peace. "We need to leave, now," Thomas said hoarsely, helping Sarah and Emily to their feet. Michael, still clutching the crucifix, nodded in agreement. They stumbled out into the night, the storm now a gentle rain. As they reached the safety of their car, they looked back at the house. It seemed to watch them, its dark windows like eyes filled with a silent warning. The Daniels never returned to the house. They left Ravenswood and started anew in a different town, far from the horrors they had experienced. The house remained empty, a silent sentinel of its dark past. Years later, rumors of the haunted house at the edge of Ravenswood persisted. Some said they could still hear the cries of a sorrowful woman and the sinister laughter of a cruel man. The house stood as a chilling reminder of the malevolent forces that lurked within, waiting for the next unsuspecting family to fall into its grasp. The Daniels' departure left the house vacant once more, but it wouldn't remain so for long. Newcomers to Ravenswood often heard about the old Victorian house, and despite its dark reputation, curiosity, and the allure of a bargain would eventually draw someone in. It wasn't long before a new family, the Mitchells, came across the listing. The Mitchell family, consisting of Jonathan, his wife Rebecca, and their teenage son, Alex, were new to Ravenswood. Like the Daniels before them, they were enticed by the charm and affordability of the Victorian house. Rebecca, an artist, saw the potential in the house's intricate architecture, while Jonathan, a history enthusiast, was fascinated by its storied past. Alex, however, was less enthusiastic. Another old house? Seriously, Dad? He complained as they stood outside the towering structure. The house seemed to brood under the cloudy sky, its dark windows reflecting a distant, stormy horizon. "You'll see, Alex," Jonathan said, patting his son on the back. "This place has character. It just needs a bit of love." Rebecca smiled, already imagining her easel set up in the spacious rooms. "I think it's beautiful," she said. "We can make it our own." As they moved in, the Mitchells were determined to create a new chapter for the house. They unpacked their belongings, filling the rooms with laughter and life. Rebecca set up her studio in the sunroom, where the light poured in through large, dusty windows. Jonathan began exploring the old library, discovering books that had not been touched in decades. Alex, reluctantly, took up residence in the attic room. For a while, things seemed normal. The Mitchells settled into their routines, and the house seemed to welcome their presence. But it wasn't long before the strange occurrences began again. One evening, as Rebecca painted in her studio, she heard a soft crying. She paused, listening intently. The sound seemed to come from the hallway. Curious, she stepped out of the room, following the faint, mournful sobs. They led her to a small, forgotten room at the back of the house. As she opened the door, the crying stopped abruptly. The room was empty, its air thick with dust and the weight of forgotten memories. Rebecca shook her head, dismissing it as her imagination, and returned to her studio. But the incident left her uneasy, a sense of sadness lingering in her heart. Meanwhile, Jonathan's exploration of the library unearthed a hidden compartment behind one of the bookcases. Inside, he found an old diary, its pages yellowed with age. It belonged to Eleanor Blackwood. Jonathan was intrigued and began reading her entries, uncovering a tale of despair and torment. Eleanor wrote of her husband's cruelty and her own descent into sorrow. The final entry ended abruptly, hinting at a dark secret she had discovered. As Jonathan delved deeper into Eleanor's story, he began to feel a connection to her. He felt compelled to uncover the truth about her death and the fate of Gregory Blackwood. But the more he read, the more he sensed a growing darkness in the house, as if the past were reaching out to claim him. Alex, initially indifferent to the house, started experiencing disturbing dreams. Each night, he found himself wandering through the corridors of the house, shadows flickering at the edge of his vision. He often awoke drenched in sweat, the sound of whispered voices echoing in his ears. One night, he dreamed of a figure standing at the foot of his bed, a woman with hollow eyes and a sorrowful expression. When he told his parents, they tried to reassure him. "It's just your mind playing tricks on you," Jonathan said, though his own experiences made him less certain. Rebecca, however, was becoming more unsettled. She began to see fleeting glimpses of a woman in the mirror, her eyes filled with sorrow. The sightings grew more frequent, and Rebecca started to feel an oppressive presence whenever she was alone. One particularly stormy night, the house's malevolence resurfaced with a vengeance. As the wind howled and lightning illuminated the dark sky, the house seemed to come alive. Doors slammed shut, and the walls creaked ominously. The Mitchells huddled together in the living room, fear etched on their faces. "We can't stay here," Alex said, his voice trembling. "Something's wrong with this place." Jonathan, gripping the old diary, nodded. "I've been reading Eleanor's diary. There's something evil here. We need to leave." Before they could act, a chilling voice echoed through the house. "You cannot leave. You are mine." The temperature dropped sharply, and the lights flickered. The figure of the bad man materialized before them, his eyes glowing with malevolent intent. Behind him, the sad lady appeared, her face etched with sorrow and desperation. Rebecca clutched Alex, while Jonathan held the diary out in a futile attempt to ward off the spirits. "What do you want?" he shouted. The bad man's cruel smile widened. "Your souls," he hissed, advancing toward them. The sad lady reached out, her hollow eyes pleading for help. Jonathan remembered the crucifix the Daniels had left behind, now hanging above the fireplace. He grabbed it and held it high. "In the name of all that is holy, leave us." The spirits recoiled, and the bad man's form flickered. The sad lady's eyes filled with a glimmer of hope. There was a deafening crash, and the house shook violently. The Mitchells stood their ground, the crucifix their only protection against the malevolent force. Jonathan felt a surge of determination. "We need to help Eleanor," he realized. "She's trapped here, just like us." Rebecca nodded, tears streaming down her face. "We have to end this." With a collective resolve, the family began to recite prayers and call out to Eleanor, urging her to break free from the bad man's grip. The air grew thick with tension, and the house seemed to pulse with dark energy. The sad lady's figure shimmered, her form growing stronger. "Help me," she whispered, her voice filled with hope and desperation. The bad man's fury grew, and he lashed out, trying to silence her. But the Mitchells continued, their voices rising in defiance. The crucifix glowed brightly, casting a radiant light that seemed to pierce the darkness. The bad man howled in rage, his form disintegrating under the holy light. Eleanor, freed from his control, stepped forward. "Thank you," she said softly, her eyes filled with gratitude. With a final, sorrowful look, she vanished, the oppressive presence lifting from the house. The Mitchells stood in stunned silence, the house now eerily quiet. The storm outside had passed, and a calm, peaceful dawn began to break. The following days were filled with a sense of relief and hope. The house, once a place of fear and darkness, now felt lighter, as if a great burden had been lifted. The Mitchells decided to stay, determined to honor Eleanor's memory and create a home filled with love and happiness. Jonathan continued his research, uncovering more about the Blackwood family and ensuring that their story was told. Rebecca's paintings took on a new vibrancy, inspired by the light that now filled the house. Alex, no longer plagued by nightmares, began to enjoy his new home, finding solace in its quiet corners. The house at the edge of Ravenswood, once known as a place of horror, became a symbol of resilience and redemption. The Mitchells' courage and determination had broken the cycle of fear, bringing peace to both the living and the departed. But as the years passed and the Mitchells grew older, the house waited. It had seen many families come and go, each leaving their mark. And though the darkness had been dispelled, the house remembered. For in the shadows of its history, echoes of the past lingered, waiting for the day when the story would continue once more. Years turned into decades, and the Mitchell family eventually moved away, leaving the old Victorian house behind. The house stood empty once again, its windows dark and silent. Ravenswood grew around it, but the house remained a solitary figure, its secrets buried deep within its walls. Newcomers to the town often heard whispers about the haunted house, tales of ghostly apparitions and mysterious disappearances. Most steered clear, but not everyone was deterred. One fateful day, a young couple named Andrew and Lisa Blackwell moved to Ravenswood, drawn by the house's charm and history. They were researchers of the paranormal, eager to uncover the mysteries that lay within. Andrew and Lisa were determined to document their experiences. Armed with cameras, voice recorders, and other investigative tools, they moved into the house, ready to face whatever lurked in the shadows. The first few nights were quiet, the house seemingly welcoming them. They settled in, turning one of the rooms into a makeshift control center for their equipment. Lisa, fascinated by the history of the Blackwood family, spent hours reading through old records and newspapers. She discovered Jonathan Mitchell's writings and Eleanor Blackwood's diary, piecing together the tragic events that had unfolded within the house. The story of Eleanor's torment and the malevolent spirit of Gregory Blackwood intrigued her. Andrew, on the other hand, focused on setting up their equipment. He placed cameras in every room, hoping to capture evidence of the supernatural. Voice recorders were strategically hidden, and motion sensors were installed at key points around the house. As they delved deeper into their investigation, the house began to stir. One night, as Lisa was reviewing footage in the control room, she noticed a shadow moving across the hallway outside. She called Andrew over, and they watched in silence as the shadow took the shape of a woman, a familiar, sorrowful figure. "It's Eleanor," Lisa whispered, her heart pounding. Andrew nodded, his eyes fixed on the screen. "We need to help her," he said, echoing Jonathan Mitchell's determination from years before. They decided to hold a seance, hoping to communicate with Eleanor and understand her plight. They sat up in the living room, candles flickering around them, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. Holding hands, they closed their eyes and called out to Eleanor, asking her to come forward. The temperature dropped sharply, and a cold wind swept through the room. The candles flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness. Then, a soft, sorrowful voice filled the air. "Help me," Eleanor whispered, her presence palpable. Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. "We're here to help, Eleanor. What do you need?" Before Eleanor could respond, a sinister laugh echoed through the room. The temperature dropped even further, and the oppressive presence of the bad man filled the space. "You cannot save her," he hissed, his voice dripping with malice. "She is mine." Andrew tightened his grip on Lisa's hand. "We won't let you hurt her anymore," he said defiantly. The bad man's form materialized before them, his eyes glowing with a dark, malevolent light. The air grew thick with tension as he advanced, his cruel smile widening. Determined to free Eleanor, Andrew and Lisa called upon every ounce of courage they had. Lisa held up a crucifix, its silver surface gleaming in the dim light. "In the name of all that is holy, leave this place," she commanded. The bad man recoiled, his form flickering. Eleanor's spirit appeared beside him, her eyes filled with sorrow and desperation. "Help me," she repeated, her voice stronger now. Andrew and Lisa began to recite prayers, their voices rising in defiance. The crucifix glowed brighter, casting a radiant light that seemed to pierce the darkness. The bad man howled in rage, his form disintegrating under the holy light. Eleanor's spirit grew stronger, her form becoming more solid. "Thank you," she said softly, her eyes filled with gratitude. With a final, sorrowful look, she vanished, the oppressive presence lifting from the house. The house seemed to sigh in relief, the darkness that had plagued it for so long finally dispelled. Andrew and Lisa collapsed into each other's arms, exhausted but victorious. The following days were filled with a sense of relief and triumph. The house, once a place of fear and darkness, now felt lighter, as if a great burden had been lifted. Andrew and Lisa documented their experiences, sharing their story with the world. Their investigation brought attention to the house, turning it into a symbol of resilience and redemption. They decided to stay, turning the house into a research center for paranormal activity. Other investigators and researchers visited, eager to learn from their experiences and uncover more about the house's history. As the years passed, the house at the edge of Ravenswood became a place of learning and discovery. The spirits that once haunted its halls found peace, their stories told and their souls freed. The house, no longer a place of horror, became a beacon of hope for those seeking to understand the supernatural. But even as it stood as a symbol of redemption, the house remained vigilant. It had seen many families and would see many more. It waited, its dark windows reflecting the past and the future, ready for the next chapter in its long, storied history. Years turned into decades, and the story of the house at Ravenswood became a legend in the paranormal community. The Blackwell's Research Center thrived, attracting visitors from all over the world. Yet, as time went on, the house began to show signs of its old malevolence. Equipment malfunctioned, whispers filled the halls, and shadows moved in the corners of rooms. The Blackwells, now older and with grown children, felt the changes. Andrew and Lisa's son, Daniel, had taken an interest in the paranormal from a young age. He grew up hearing the stories of the house and eventually took over the research center. Unlike his parents, Daniel believed that not all spirits were malevolent and that understanding their stories could bring true peace. One autumn evening, as the leaves turned golden and the air grew crisp, Daniel decided to conduct an experiment. He gathered a group of fellow researchers, all experts in the field of paranormal activity, and proposed a new method of communication. Instead of invoking the spirits through traditional means, they would use advanced technology to create a more stable and controlled environment. Daniel's team set up an array of sophisticated equipment in the main hall: thermal cameras, electromagnetic field detectors, and a specially designed spirit box that could isolate and amplify ghostly voices. They were determined to bridge the gap between the living and the dead, hoping to uncover more about the house's history and the spirits that lingered. As night fell, the group gathered around the spirit box. Daniel, holding his parents' crucifix, initiated the session. "We mean no harm," he said clearly, his voice steady. "We seek only to understand and to help." The equipment hummed to life, and the room filled with an eerie silence. Then, the spirit box crackled, and a faint voice emerged. "Help me," it whispered, a voice that Daniel recognized from his parents' stories. It was Eleanor. "How can we help you, Eleanor?" Daniel asked, leaning closer to the spirit box. Before Eleanor could respond, another voice cut through the static, a voice filled with rage and hatred. "Leave us alone," the bad man growled, his presence sending a chill through the room. The equipment went haywire, alarms blaring and lights flashing. The air grew thick with a sense of dread, and the shadows in the room seemed to grow darker, more oppressive. Despite the fear, Daniel remained calm,